Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Perfect Mate, which is episode 21 of season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation one episode at a time. In this video I cover the 5th season episode The Perfect Mate. So The Perfect Mate is the episode where Picard is, or the Enterprise I should say, is transporting an ambassador on a peace mission to make peace with their longtime enemies that they've been at war with. And he has a mysterious cargo. The Enterprise rescue a pair of Ferengi, but we find out that the Ferengi purposely wanted to get on the Enterprise so that they could steal this cargo. And in the process of trying to steal it, they end up opening the cargo, which turns out to be a woman. And not just any woman, but a telepath who is the perfect mate for any male who knows how to read their minds, and his whole existence is to form an alliance or form a bond with the leader of the warring faction in order to create peace. And so she would bond with them telepathically and become his ideal of the perfect mate. But the problem is she was released from her stasis too early, and she's maturing and getting ready to bond. And in this stage she's very sexual and causes sexual tension around all the men around her. Eventually the Ferengi try to bribe the ambassador in order to get Kamala, but in the process they do damage to him where he's knocked unconscious, and so he can no longer conduct the negotiations. So Picard has to conduct the negotiations for him, and Kamala has to guide Picard on her culture and prepare him for the negotiations. But in doing so, Picard spends a lot of time with Kamala, who seems very attracted to him and comes on to him a lot. In fact, eventually she forms the bond with Picard instead of the leader that she's supposed to, but she marries the other leader instead, telling Picard that she will still be able to please him because she's still an empath and she'll know how to be the perfect mate for him. But really she's permanently bonded with Picard, and Picard has to watch as she's married and goes off to live with this guy who's more concerned about treaty negotiations than he is about the marriage, and doesn't really seem to care about it. So so before, when I did my season by season review, I did a top 30 worst episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, and this was my number 30. I got a lot of pushback on that. It's funny because I did a whole video on 30 worst episodes. So I had 30 different episodes I considered worst, and I got I didn't get that many comments, maybe like 8 comments, and 2 of them were about this episode and how they actually really liked it. And when I did my research and watched a lot of reviews recently, I've noticed a lot of people really like this episode, which surprised me. One review I watched gave it a 4 out of 5. Another review I watched that had 4 people on it, and they all gave it 9 out of 10. One person even gave it a 9.5 out of 10, and I found a couple other reviews that were quite positive on this episode. So that reaction surprised me because I never liked this episode. When it first came out, I found it boring as hell. And I continue to find it boring as hell. But when I got older, not only did I find it boring, I also found it sexist. And I remember, I believe it was my sister's review when she talked about this episode first, made me realize the sexist overtones in the episode. And so I watched it again and could see how it was very misogynistic in some terms. And it's interesting because watching these other reviews from like that one podcast I was telling you about that had 4 people on it, all gave it 9 out of 10. Those podcasters are quite progressive, and they seem to have the opposite view, that it wasn't at all sexist, and that it was a healthy portrayal of the sex drive. So it's interesting. So I watched this, when I watched this episode again for this review just yesterday, I tried to come at it from a different perspective and see other people's point of view. And, you know, I don't think I would any longer put this in my top 30 worst. Especially after going through season 5 in particular. I could point out several other episodes that are much worse. Now, to be fair, in my top 30 worst, I had New Ground and Masterpiece Society were higher than it. So even back then, I did say this wasn't the worst episode of season 5. There was those other 2 episodes, and of course, The Game is in my top 5 of worst, and not even talking about getting into season 5. So those episodes were higher up, but I think, after going through season 5, I think there's more episodes I would put higher than this, such as Ethics, which I know is another big fight I'll have with a lot of people, because a lot of people seem to love that episode, and I really don't like it. And also Hero Worship. I don't think I had maybe I did have Hero Worship in my top 30 worst. Actually, I think I might have. I can't remember exactly, but I would definitely put that one higher. Definitely I would put Ethics higher. And maybe there's another one, season 5, I'm not thinking of, that I would also put higher. But, so in other words, I'm not that big on season 5. But, so I don't know. I don't think I would put this in my top 30 worst anymore. Especially even outside of season 5, there's plenty of episodes of TNG that I think are worse than this one. But I still disagree with those who really like this episode. Like, I haven't changed my mind that much. And getting more specifically into the topic of, is it sexist, my answer is still yes. Maybe not as strong of a yes as I had last time I watched it, but it's still yes. Because I can see where the other perspective is coming from. Because she is volunteering for this. Nothing is being done against her will. She is consenting for everything. And then it gets into the topic of cultural backgrounds and the topic of arranged marriages, which I talked about. I think I talked about this in Elan of Troyes in TOS. And I was quite critical of arranged marriages. Now, I talked about how, in general, like, it depends. If both parties are consenting adults, and the adult part is very important, and they're okay with being an arranged marriage, and I don't see anything wrong with it. But they do, like I was talking about, I knew someone from India who was in an arranged marriage, and he was talking about it. He was perfectly fine with it, and the person he was marrying was around his same age, and she was perfectly fine with it. So I don't really see anything wrong with that. But arranged marriages traditionally and sort of more historically are not sort of practiced in that way. I mean, I'm watching House of the Dragon right now, and you see them marrying all 4-year-olds to 50-year-old men and shit like that, which is historically done, even sometimes practiced present day. Still doing shit like that and stuff like that. I'm totally against, because especially if you're doing it of a minor, because they cannot by definition be consenting because they're too young to fully understand the implications. Now you might say, well, this episode Kamala is an adult, and she's a consenting adult, but I think it's a bit more murky than that, because she was taken from her mother at the age of 4 and told, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use this word because I think it applies, she was groomed to be this perfect bride. She was groomed for her only purpose in life, to please men. Now, granted, they say that she's a metamorph, and metamorphs by nature can sense the, wants and desires of their partners, and it pleases them in order to please others. However, I feel like this episode has kind of an untrustworthy, or what's the term we use? Unreliable narrator. In terms of both the ambassador and Kamala, because they're just repeating what their culture is telling them. So, and I think maybe the writers are telling us, no, this is really the case. But I think the way it's presented in the episode, is it though? Is it really the case that this is what metamorphs are, that is in their nature to want to please others? Or is that just societal norms? Is that just what society has taught them? And the fact that they even say outright she was taken from her mother at the age of 4, raised by the state essentially, and groomed for the singular purpose to marry a leader of the warring faction in order to make peace. It comes off as a bit less consensual, doesn't it? It comes off of a bit like, oh no, she's doing what it's what she wants to do. She wants to marry this man, but she was groomed at a very young age to want that. So to me, it still makes it misogynistic. I'm sorry. I mean, I have to say, I get the argument where other people are coming from that it's not misogynistic, but I think it is. I think it still is. That the whole... And maybe this is my modern Westerner perspective, but I am, as I said, not against all arranged marriages, as I talked about, but the classical sense of arranged marriage where, like again, referencing stuff like House of the Dragon, which is based off of, real-life middle-aged history and stuff, the Middle Ages and stuff like that, is when they send make marriage just for a political alliance. We'll marry this person off to this other person who've never met each other, but our houses or our countries or our nations want to make peace, so that's how we're going to make peace. Now, I'm not judging history, because history was a totally different circumstance and a different society and different nature, whatever, and it already happened, so I'm not here to judge stuff that happened hundreds of years ago. I'm here to judge what happens now, and now that whole concept seems very outdated and primitive and barbaric a little bit, because it's not really consenting, is it? And so this episode doesn't take place in the past, and in fact takes place in the future. And this is a problem I had, and I think I brought this up in my review of Alan of Troyes as well, and I have the same problem here, is that in the future, we should be way beyond that, because we're beyond that right now, or at least should be for the most part. As I said, it's still going on in some places, like the bad kind of arranged marriage is not the acceptable kind. It's still happening in present day. And so if we're beyond that now for the most part, then in 500 years we should be, 400 years, something like that, 4 and some change, we should be way beyond it. Way beyond. Is it 400 or is it 300 years? It's closer to 300 years now, because it's the 24th century. We're in the 21st. So yeah, it would be closer to the 300 and some change. But damn, they really should have set this show much further in the future. Really, like, the where humanity's at, it should have been set 1,000 years in the future, or a couple thousand, but that's neither here nor there. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything. Point is, it's this future utopian society, and yes, I know this is an alien race, it's not the Federation itself, but it still seems barbaric to me to have this kind of arranged marriage. I don't give a shit that she's okay with it or actively wants it, because she was raised, I won't use the word groom anymore, but still, she was raised to do so, and so this makes the whole thing a bit more shady and still, in my opinion, misogynistic. And so we get Beverly and Picard in their discussion. They're sort of surrogates for the audience, because Beverly, and I do like that. In fact, the people who reviewed this episode who really liked it, loved it, thought Beverly was being unreasonable. Where I think that, and it's like, why does she care? Why is she being so upset of what they're doing? Whereas I totally get her point of view. She's like that slave master who calls himself an ambassador. I like that line. And I totally see her perspective. And I think that's actually the correct reaction to have. And again, this gets into judging others' cultures or whatnot, which is more of Picard's reasoning. And of course, he brings up the Prime Directive. It's like, oh yes, and I do like that whole scene with Picard. It's like, oh yes, let's just interfere, take her away against her will, and force her to do this, and destroy this peace treaty. And so Picard has a point as well, which is why I think it's a really good scene. But I think it's important to get that perspective of Beverly. And she sort of just hits him with, well, you realize that that ambassador has her locked up and won't let her leave her room. Picard's like, oh, well, shit, that's different. So it is interesting that it tackles the different angles and different ways of looking at the topic, but I still think overall the episode comes off as a bit, just the whole nature of a woman whose own existence is just to please men. Now, they did throw in a line purposely to try to be like, no, it's all good. And that line is when the ambassador guy says, oh, male metamorphs are very common, but female metamorphs are very rare. And so I did read somewhere that they specifically put that line in there to be like, no, it's not sexist, you see, because men do the same thing. In fact, it's more common for men to do the same thing, so it's all good. Which, I don't know about that. Like, that seems a bit contrived and a bit too obvious of the writers being like, no, it's all good. Where, I'm not quite buying it. Sorry, I'm not. So, other than it being sexist, the other thing I had against this episode is that it's boring. And as I mentioned before, like, I didn't like this episode at first because I thought it was very boring, and I still think that now. Here's my problem with it. I don't see the chemistry between Picard and Kamala, and maybe other people do who like this episode a lot. And it's funny because I just read a quote from Michael Piller, who was saying that they had to, this script went through a lot of rewrites and they had to constantly rewrite it because Piller was saying that the chemistry between Picard and Kamala wasn't working, and that in order for the episode to really work, that their chemistry had to be electrifying. And I don't think it got there. Sorry. To me, it just felt a bit contrived. The fact that she was so into Picard. Like, I know they try to explain it as like, oh, well, Picard's a strong leader type and she's been bred to be attracted to strong leader types, but I don't know, that's not enough for me. I just didn't see anything in between. It just seemed like she was being unreasonably, like, very, like, hot for Picard. And that didn't seem earned at all. It seemed like plot contrivance. It seemed like the reason why she was very attracted to Picard is because he's the main cast member of the show. And it's because the plot wanted her to be attracted to him so that they could have a plot. It didn't seem natural. It felt contrived. And so I just found it boring. Honestly, I just don't think it worked. But that is just me. So, speaking about the writing of this episode, that is another very interesting topic. So, I wanted to talk about Renee Echeverria because I haven't had a chance to talk about him in season 5 yet. If I don't know, I'm still apologize if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. I try, but Renee Echeverria has a story by credit along with Gary Perconte, and I'll talk about Gary Perconte in a second. But with Renee Echeverria, so I talked about him in season 3 because he wrote the spec script for The Offspring, and he was working as a waiter at a cafe at the time, and they flew him out to Hollywood and told him to rewrite it, and they said he did a terrible job, so they fired him. But then they kept his name in the writing credits of The Offspring, even though they changed it a lot from the original idea. But they apparently liked him enough to invite him back, so he came back to write the episode Transfigurations. And so I'm a bit blurry on what happened next because I didn't hear specifically on the interview, but I see that he has a writing credit for The Mind's Eye, which is almost exactly a year after Transfiguration. So I suppose for whatever reason a year later, hey, why don't we bring back that Renee fella? Or maybe he submitted another script. I'm not sure. But whatever the case may be, A Mind's Eye was an amazing episode. So clearly the producers also agreed that it was a good episode. So he was then hired as a regular staff member on season 5. So since the start of season 5, he's been a regular cast member. And I wasn't sure when exactly he came on board as a regular writer. But I learned as I was reviewing season 5 that it was season 5. That was at the start of season 5. Now, I'm bringing him up here is because the main episode that he wrote for season 5 was I, Borg, and I already covered that episode, so I'll talk about that in a revisited. And I talked about Renee Echeverria and I revisited already, but I wanted to talk about him in a public video, and this seemed as good an episode as any because he did help co-write it. But getting back to this episode more specifically and some of the other writers, so I said I would touch back on Gary Perconte, or however you say his name, because, well, it doesn't really matter because it's not a real name. It is a pseudonym. Let me see if I can find here. Gary Perconte. It was a pseudonym for Michael Pillar's friend, Ruben Leader, who disliked the rewrites of his draft of the script. It was the only time that a writer requested a pseudonym during Pillar's time on Next Generation, which is pretty interesting. So apparently he didn't like what was done with the script either. So let's talk about some alternate endings then, because in the DVD, or not the DVD, sorry, the Blu-ray, which is what I watched this on, they had a deleted scene, and it was an alternate ending where we see that Kamala is about to get married to Ulrich Gavolt or whatever, and Picard steps in and is like, no, I can't allow this to happen. She's bonded with me. We're in love. She needs to stay with me. And it goes to Ulrich, and it's like, look, you said yourself that you didn't even care about the marriage that much. You weren't interested in trade negotiations. We can still do the trade negotiations. We can still do peace. But she's bonded with me and she should be mine. And Ulrich is like, oh, yeah, no, that's all good. That's fine. You're right. All good with me. And Camilla's smiling. It's like, oh, Picard, I'll be with you forever. And then we cut back to Picard watching the wedding. So that was all in his head. It was just his imaginings. He didn't really do that. And then he has to stand there and watch as she marries Ulrich Gavolt, this guy who clearly doesn't really care that much about her. I have mixed feelings about this alternate ending because part of me thinks it would have been better because it explains Picard's feelings in the moment more than the episode did, I think. I get a better sense of how attracted he is to her. And now, we did get that scene when he was talking to Beverly about it, which I do like. I think that's a really good scene. But this, I think, goes further of seeing that he really is like this close to just wanting to stop the wedding and whisk her away. But of course, his duty and his, more reserved Starfleet captain training prevent him from doing so, but it's still tragic. So I think it adds a layer of tragedy that wasn't there in the original draft. But the part of me that doesn't like this ending is it's because that is too much of a stereotypical Hollywood cliche or Hollywood trope to show something happening and the hero stepping in, but like, no, I will do this, and then they flash back and say and show you, aha, just messing with you. That's not actually what happened. That's just the main character dreaming or fantasizing about it. And I don't like that trope. I think that trope is, because it is a bit contrived, it is a bit too much of the writers trying to be like, fooled you, haha, you thought that actually happened, but it's just Picard daydreaming. And so that aspect of it I don't like. So, but I'm mixed. Like, I've heard, like everyone else I heard in reviews that talked about this are more stern on that was a stupid ending. It's a good thing they didn't have it in there. But I am not so stern about that. I'm more mixed. Because in some ways I think it would have been better. But in other ways, I just don't like the tropiness of it, I suppose. But there's another alternate ending which I think actually would have been way better and they should have gone with, which they never filmed. And that is an ending where Kamala refuses to marry Ulrich and also refuses to stay with Picard. Because of the fact that she bonded with Picard, she gained his sense of independence and of adventure and wanting to explore the galaxy. So, and she's, relates more to Picard, who's trying to instill a sense of independence on her, saying that you don't need to live your life to please another man. And so that's what she does. She's like, I don't need to marry anyone. I'm going to go off on my own and explore the galaxy. And so Michael Piller talked about how he fought for that ending, but he was overruled. Now, he wouldn't say, at least in the quotes I read, he wouldn't say who specifically overruled, but he said they, so it was more than one person. But as I've talked about in other scripts, Michael Piller is the head writer. He has final say. Like for First Duty, for example, both the writers of First Duty, Naren Shankar and Ronald D. Moore, wanted a different ending, but Michael Piller wanted the one that was in the show, and he overrode them. Even though he was outnumbered, he still was the head writer, so he overrode them, which tells me that someone above him had to overrule him. Rick Berman! But the fact that he said they could mean it was Rick Berman and the other writers, that they were all siding against him, or it could mean it was Rick Berman and other producers ahead of Michael Piller above him that overruled him. But I'm not too sure about that. And here's the thing. I love Michael Piller. I talk about, not everything he does is perfect. There are sometimes I disagree with him, but I think he is the singular best writer in Next Generation and in Star Trek in general. He saved and created the Star Trek, made the franchise something that I love. Like, I don't think that I would love the franchise half as much if it wasn't for what he contributed to it. And I think he's a singular responsible for saving Next Generation, for creating this 90s golden age of Trek. So I agree with him in this case. I think this episode would have been way better. I think this would have been a much, much better ending. And I totally disagree with those that overrode him or that disagreed with him. Apparently, their argument was that turn in Kamala wasn't earned, and it would feel like it came out of nowhere. And Piller disagreed with that, and I agree with Piller, because I also disagree with that. I think that it was earned because she bonded with Picard, and the whole episode was just Picard trying to instill this sense of independence in her. And so we see that it worked, particularly when we get this, magical psychopathic, or psychic, or I don't know what you call it, telekinetic connection, the bond that she formed with Picard. To me, that, not psychopathic, that's the wrong word, telepathic, I think is the word I was looking for. But anyway, the telepathic bond that she formed with Picard, and it would make sense that she would take on what Picard has wanted for her all along, sense of independence, and that she would also, from that telepathic bond, get Picard's sense of exploring the space and being an adventurer, and that's what she would want to do. So it actually makes perfect sense to me. But not only does it make perfect sense, I think it would have been a way better ending. Now, some people, like the people who really liked this episode, that one review that loved this episode, they thought that the ending was really good because it had a tragic, melancholy feel to it. And maybe it's because I wasn't that invested in the Picard-Kamala romance, and I wasn't that interested in this episode, that I did not find it that tragic. I get the feel that they were going for, but to me it doesn't really affect me that much. I don't really care. But the larger point is that if they had that ending, to me this would prevent it from being sexist or misogynistic, which I do think it is. And I think had they had this ending, that would have saved it. That would have prevented it from being sexist. Because it would, instead of having, because the way they end it with her marrying this man who's very disinterested in her, and just doing it because it's her duty, because these old men and the state raised her to do it. That's misogynistic. And to me, it would have been way better if it would have been like more female empowerment if she was like, no, I don't need a man. I don't need to do what my fucking society tells me to do. I don't need to marry you. I don't need to marry you. I can go off and do what the fuck I want. And again, I agree with Pillar that it would have been totally earned, because that would be Picard's perspective. And after she bonded with Picard, like she said, then that's what she would want to do. And so that is the ending, I think. I totally disagree with those who shot down Michael Pillar. I think this episode would have been a billion times better if Pillar got his way. I think that ending would have saved the episode. And it would have prevented it from being sexist, for one thing. I think it would have saved the episode in so many different levels. So I'm really disappointed. I think they ruined the episode by having that ending and I don't really understand why they had Ulrika Volt be like, oh, to tell you the truth, I care more about the trade negotiations. I'm not really interested in her, because why did they do that? See, to me, I feel like that was a holdover from either one of those endings, because I guess it kind of makes sense for that fake out ending that they had in deleted scene, because you would buy when he says, oh yes, you're right, I'm not that interested in her anyway, and lets Picard have her. But it also works more in the sense of the other ending where she's like, nah, fuck this shit, I'm out of here, that he would be like, alright, whatever, I wasn't that interested in her anyway. But as it is, like, it just, I don't know, maybe it's supposed to add to the tragedy that she has to marry, but to me, it doesn't add to the tragedy, it adds to the misogyny, and it adds to this being a stupid episode. But that is just my interpretation of it. Anyway, so, a lot of thing I've heard a lot of people bring up is, why did we not see Kamala hang out with other women, or what effect would she have on other women? And I've also heard people say, oh, the fact that she only made men horny, not women horny, was a bit heteronormative and sort of not acknowledging that LGBTQ people exist. And there was, to be fair, there was an episode of Enterprise, which I fucking hate this episode, called Rajin, where they had this female hot chick who was supposed to be a Zindi agent there to get biological information on the Enterprise crew, and but she was like had a similar effect where she would activate men's hormones and make them horny every time she was around. And to be fair, they did have a scene where she also made the women horny. I think she made T'Pol horny and was like flirting with her. But there, in that case, I hated it because it was just shameless, gratuitous sex appeal, which Enterprise is known for. Whereas had it did in this episode, it wouldn't have come off as gratuitous sex appeal. But yeah, I've heard the argument that maybe like the women wouldn't be attracted to her the way the men are unless they are already attracted to women, which at this stage the show, especially Rick Berman, are too chicken shit to show any same-sex couples, which is ultimately the reason why they didn't do it. But I heard the alternative is that maybe that the women could have been sort of enthralled with her on a more platonic level, which I think would have been really interesting. Like if they had showed Beverly hanging out with her and being like, "Oh my God, you understand me more than anyone. Oh my God, we feeling like we're sisters or something." Like that would make sense. I think it would have added an extra dynamic to it, particularly if they showed same-sex, women also attracted to her. But no, of course, Rick Berman, the fucking asshole, who's like, "How come people didn't like the Outcast and didn't think it was and thought it was copping out? How come they didn't like my attempt to reach out to the gay community?" It's because you refuse to show same-sex couples on the show, you fucking bigot. But anyway, sorry. Anyway. So let's talk about the Kriosians, because this is, the Kriosians are the race that Kamala and that ambassador guy are a part of, and they're from the planet Krios. And this isn't the first or even the last time that we will see the Kriosians in Star Trek, but I don't think it works, because so the first time the Kriosians are mentioned is the episode The Mind's Eye, which involves a Klingon occupation that they control the planet of Krios, and that there's a Kriosian rebellion trying to expel the Klingons from their planet, and the Klingons accuse the Federation of supplying weapons to the Kriosian rebels. That at all does not match the Kriosians in this episode, because they never mention the Klingons. The Klingons are supposed to have a governor at their planet that controls their planet, never mentioned. But more than that, it's saying that the Kriosians are at war for the past 100 years with this other alien race, whatever the fuck, Ulrich a Volt, maybe the Voltians, I don't know what the fuck they are, but they're supposed to be at war with this race for 100 years. But how could they be at war with another alien species if the Klingons are occupying their planet and controlling it? Like, the Klingons are just like, "Oh yes, we control your planet, and I'm the governor of the ruler of the planet, but sure, you can go off and fight this other alien race." Yeah, no, I'm sorry. That doesn't sound at all like the Klingons. The Klingons would be like, "Oh, you dare to attack a Klingon, a planet of the Klingon Empire," and they'll go and fucking destroy them in an instant with their puny ships. Well, the Klingons will destroy the puny ships with their awesome ships. So yeah, it's just, they shouldn't have called it Krios. Because, and also, I talked about in The Mind's Eye that they never specifically said the Kriosians were actually aliens. Like, I got the impression that they were just Klingon colonists who colonized this world called Krios, and they're technically was a part of the Klingon Empire, and they wanted their own independence and to become an independent nation, and that's why they were fighting. To me, that would have made more sense than it being aliens that the Klingons were occupying. But especially not these aliens, because they don't at all come off as if they're occupied by the Klingons. So, no, this doesn't match. They should have came up with a different alien race. Now, the other time we hear the term Kriosians apparently is the episode The Precious Cargo from Enterprise, which is my least favorite episode of Enterprise and one of my least favorite episodes of the entire franchise. It was in my top 3, I believe, worst episodes. And it just figures that they would have. But that episode was way worse because it was also about this hot chick. In that case, she wasn't a metamorph, but still, she was a hot chick that formed a romance with Trip that wasn't at all earned, and they had absolutely zero chemistry. Of course, the major difference from that episode to this one is that hot chick was played by a terrible actor, whereas in this episode, actually, they had a really good actor playing her, which I think actually elevated the episode, the fact the actor was so good. But I'll get more into her a bit later. But, so that is not, the fact that they're the Kriosians and Precious Cargo is not so hard to buy as the mind's eye thing. As I said, that I don't buy it in the slightest. I think that they are not the same alien. I just don't see it. But the Precious Cargo one being the same aliens as these, sure, why not? It doesn't really matter. But I did find it funny when the ambassador guy was talking to Picard, and he was like, oh yes, make sure my cargo is not disturbed at all. It's very fragile, and it can't be destroyed. And so I was thinking as he was saying this, I was like, so what you're saying is that your cargo is precious. That you're saying that you have precious cargo. Yeah. And the other thing is, getting into it, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I've looked it up. I've listened to it online. I've heard it pronounced several different ways. But I believe is Famke Janssen, the actress who plays Kamala, who went on to be known for playing Jean Grey in the X-Men movies, and you get that extra irony for that episode because Patrick Stewart played Professor X, so some people are saying that, oh, this is, an X-Men prequel, and there was also a line where Kamala was explaining that she's a metamorph and what that means, and she's saying, I'm a mutant. And I was like, you're a mutant! Yeah. But no, she's a really good actor, and I think that she does elevate this episode a lot. This was one of her first listings on IMDb, so this is one of her first jobs, and that kind of makes sense. Because she would go on to do like GoldenEye, and of course the X-Men movie, and I believe a few other things. So she was, quite the well-known actress, and she's still around doing stuff, but it's mostly stuff I don't watch, so I don't really know. But, she, and apparently I heard that she auditioned for the role of Jadzia Dax in Deep Space Nine and almost got it. And look, I love Terry Farrell. I think she wasn't so good in the first couple seasons, but she got better. But I'm sorry, she would have done a much better job. She would have been a much better Jadzia Dax from the get-go. I don't know why they didn't go with her. Maybe they did go with her, but she turned the role down. I'm not sure what the story is with that, but they really should have went with her. I think she would have made a better Jadzia Dax. Just me. Just me. Anyway, there's also the Ferengi, in this episode, which another thing that really sucks about this episode. The whole thing, the Ferengi are just a big plot device. Alright, they have what's his face, Max Gurdenchek, who plays Rom on DS9, and his second role as a Ferengi. The first one was Captain's Holiday, but then this is the second one, and I think his third one is Rom on Deep Space Nine. But the two Ferengi are just bumbling idiots. They're really stupid. And, the funny thing about it is they had that scene I was referring to earlier where the ambassador went to Picard. It's like, you must put guards in the cargo bay. My cargo is very precious. And he didn't use that word, but still, it's a word I'll use. Is precious cargo in the cargo bay, and you need to protect it at all costs. Now, how the fuck did these Ferengis get in? Did Picard just not give a shit? Be like, yeah, whatever, precious cargo. Or does the Enterprise security just suck that much? They didn't even have a security guard on the fucking cargo bay, and the Ferengi just walk right in. But you know why it happened. You know why it happened. So the episode could happen. Jesus Christ. And then that's not the only time the Ferengi are a plot convenience or a plot device. The other time is when they attack the ambassador because they need to have it so the ambassador is incapacitated, so that Picard has to be the one to work with Kamala so that Kamala can form this bond with Picard. And so it's just a plot device to get Kamala free, then it's a plot device to get rid of the ambassador. It's just a dumb plot device. And it's funny because as soon as, following the scene where the ambassador is incapacitated, the Ferengi, there's just a line of dialogue saying off screen that the Ferengi were shipped off to a starbase. So basically it's like, well, the plot's done with them now. They serve their plot device purposes, so get rid of them. It's just so dumb. Like, I think that's sloppy writing. I think that's lazy writing, and maybe this is a sign of all those rewrites that was talked about in the episode, that they couldn't figure out how to get to certain points, and like, hey, let's just have a couple of idiot Ferengi come on board and do the things that we need for the plot to happen. And that's exactly how it comes off. And the Ferengi are just so bumbling and dumb in this episode in particular. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. But, another really interesting side note to that, though, is when one of the Ferengis is talking to the ambassador and Picard and annoying the hell out of them, and LaForge, sets him aside and grabs him. It was like, hey, let me show you these things in order to get the Ferengi to stop bothering the ambassador. What was interesting, I didn't catch this before, but what LaForge says to the Ferengi, he says, oh, have you seen the dolphins yet? Let me show you the dolphins. Now, I heard about this thing of cetacean ops, where there supposedly being dolphins on the Enterprise before. I thought that just came as a thing from the technical manual, and that, to be fair, could have been where it started. There was this book they were selling in stores, the technical manual. I had a friend who bought it. I never bought it because I don't really care about the tech side of things of Star Trek. And it created some lore that apparently was used in Trek, such as I talked about the whole thing about Klingons getting cloaking devices from the Romulans. That was never actually in canon, despite what some of the idiots try to tell you. It was not in the episode Enterprise Incident. It was from the technical manual. Anyway, the technical manual apparently had the cetacean ops, and I never heard of it until I started watching YouTube videos later on where they kept talking about, oh, there's dolphins on the Enterprise that we never get to see, and blah, blah, blah. I'd never even noticed it. And then, of course, Lower Decks would finally put it into canon, where we would actually see cetacean ops in Lower Decks or on the Cerritos, and we would see the dolphins there. But I had no idea that it actually was mentioned in canon before Lower Decks, so it wasn't just a technical manual, because, they don't specifically say cetacean ops. Apparently, there's another episode that mentioned cetacean ops, offhand. I think it was yesterday's Enterprise, so it would have been that alternate timeline. But in this time, they actually have LaForge say, oh, let's go see the dolphins. I didn't catch that before. I thought that was interesting. Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with my channel. And I very appreciate it to everyone who supports me on Patreon. I would like to give a very special thanks to Brendan Neil Howells for all your support throughout the years. Thank you so much. But I also want to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hulks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Antarius, who says, after they wanted to restrict the access to the cargo bay, it is incomprehensible how the Ferengi could enter it. Maybe Worf was busy parenting Alexander and forgot programming the door. The makeup of the Alien of the Week reminded me strongly of the Trill makeup of Deep Space Nine. Maybe they copied it from this episode after deciding not to use the original makeup. I like the scenes with Picard and Crusher where they discussed the issue of slavery, but sadly the focus of the episode was more on the impossible romance than on the issue. The whole plot is quite similar to the TOS episode Elan of Troyes, which also has many flaws, but still is, in my opinion, more exciting than this episode. My rating is a 4 out of 10. Well, I'll probably have to disagree about Elan of Troyes being better than this episode. I think they're around the same. In fact, I might like this episode slightly better than Elan of Troyes because I had a lot of issues with that episode. But as far as the makeup being similar to the Trill, I've heard it speculated that had something to do with the fact that Famke Janssen was in the running to be Dax, and she was almost Dax, and so that they maybe looked like, that reminded them of the other role that she did here. And decided to make the Trill, because originally they were going to use the same Trill makeup from the host, and they did a test. You can actually see online they did a testing with Terry Farrell having that makeup on, but then of course Rick Berman hated it because it didn't show off how sexy she was, and so they probably looked at other makeup and they're like, what about that one that the actress we almost hired for this did? Let's make her look more like that. That's my guess. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, boy, something tells me this may be one of Rick Berman's favorite episodes. I guess in honor of fairy tale type of stories about figures of royalty and the importance of keeping stability in the leadership, this tale, like other well-renowned ones like the Dauphine and Precious Cargo, there's an element of the royal figure in a romance that happens that shouldn't happen. Well, unless it's in one's culture, you get matching wedding tattoos, so I guess this trope is still around even in modern Trek. I guess the sex roles are reversed for once at least in Discovery. And more often than not, they're among the least liked episodes, often rather sexist, where it tries to shape in these cases well. The woman made the choice to keep the country's leadership in place and not pick their love interest, whether requited or not, since I don't think Picard was ever truly in love with her in this episode, and if he was, he hid it, and then he would have been influenced by pheromones. How appropriate that it's the sexist culture of the two male Ferengis who wanted to steal her. But isn't it nice to know that while she chose the status, she looked at Picard to let him know he will always be her true love? A problem. Was this free will, or was this part of her conditioning? Remember, she saw him first, and what does it say about a woman's status? We could also, of course, get into the Prime Directive, which I guess is what is discussed between Picard and Crusher. through the years, when either my local station or later Spike would feature a marathon to include the best of TNG, this episode would almost always be included. Why? I mean, it's well acted. And yes, Crusher states her objections other women Picard had in the franchise. She ranks right up there with maybe the Insurrection love interest. No. So this episode is on. Boy, I've had some insomnia, so I need a sleeping agent. There you go. 2 piano tunes you must play right out of 10. Yeah, well. So Norman's probably more in line with my thinking on this episode. I think so if you were to buy that deleted scene, then they are heavily implying that Picard was in fact in love with her. But I agree that wasn't earned in the episode itself, because it wasn't earned. And it does seem like if he did love her, it was just her pheromones influencing him. I'm sorry, but this just makes me think that ending that Michael Polar had, that would have made this episode so much better. Would have made it so much better. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, next time on Star Trek The Next Generation, Jean Grey travels inside a Cadbury cream egg in search of Charles Xavier. She growls at Sabretooth in the mating ritual. She also makes Riker horny twice and relieves himself in the holodeck. Data betrays Picard by telling personal information, and Picard talks about his mother. This was an average episode. However, I did like the scenes with Picard and Kamala, mainly because I saw the first 2 X-Men movies before this episode. I know Picard should have known that Kamala was sent to her room, but the episode had to force these 2 characters together. Now, let's talk about how awful security is on the Enterprise. If the Cadbury cream egg was so important, why was there no force field around the door? And also, why did they let the Ferengi walk around the ship without an escort? Mark's saying time, so the episode can happen. But now, let Odo give more examples. Lieutenant Commander Worf, this Patak just robbed my quarters. Odo. To the deputy, take him to the holding cell. The deputy takes the thief away. Odo, I'll need a statement. Lieutenant Commander Worf, and you will have one, but I want to know why such a security breach was allowed to occur in the first place. Odo, unfortunately these things happen. Lieutenant Commander Worf, they did not happen on the Enterprise. Odo, really? Now let me see. Consults a pad. Odo, Stardate 46235.7. Ferengi privateers led by Damon Luron boarded and seized control of the Enterprise using 2 salvaged Klingon bird of prey. Stardate 45349.1. Burnoff Rasmutin, a petty criminal impersonating a scientist, committed numerous acts of theft against the crew of the Enterprise. Shall I continue? Lieutenant Commander Worf, that will not be necessary. Odo, I know these incidents are the exception rather than the rule, but if security breaches like these could happen on the flagship of the Federation, imagine the difficulty of maintaining security at an open port such as DS9. The bigger question of the episode is what Riker did in the holodeck. Par Lenore was really Rom, and he was selling Quark's hollow novels. Vulcan, love slave. When Jean Grey comes into 10 Forward, best scene in the episode, Data being a chaperone, and when Riker saw her, he got another hard-on and left and returned the holodeck to play Vulcan, love slave Part 2, The Revenge. So my rating is 5 secrets that Data told Jean Grey about Picard out of 10. Yeah, that's a good point about the Riker thing. I forgot to remember that. This is the first time they explicitly imply that people go to the holodeck to have sex. Although because the scene after she tried kissing Riker was like, I don't open another man's gift, and then walked out of the room. But then the first thing he did was call the bridge. It's like, Bridge, if you need me, I'll be in holodeck 4. So I don't know if this is that explicit as people make it out to be, because he could just be going there to like go skiing or to blow off some steam in other ways. I mean, why would he tell the bridge that he's going to holodeck if he's going there to have sex? Wouldn't he like be more like, because then they're more likely to disturb him? Wouldn't he be more like, I'm going off for some recreations, do not disturb me? That would make more sense if he was going off to have sex. So I don't think this is the smoking gun that people claim that it is. But of course, as Stephen alludes to, this would be explicitly stated that people used the holodeck for sex in Deep Space Nine with the introduction of the holosuites, which originally that was its sole purpose. But I don't know. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, this episode is average. I mean, I don't think at all is one of the worst of the show, as most people do, but it's certainly not a great one either. I can't get over that it's Jean Grey from the X-Men films. Also, I don't like that she's obsessed with Picard all the time, and this episode is very sexist, as this woman has to be given a man, and this reminds me a lot of that episode in TOS in Season 3 where Kirk has to transport the women to some planet and he gets a love potion from her. But this episode is slightly better than that, as it's not annoying. Also, this episode is very boring and I don't buy the romance between Picard and the woman, so my rating is a 4 out of 10. You know, the funny thing is, I didn't even, because I saw this episode when it first came out, which was before the X-Men. And now, I guess I didn't watch it afterwards, after I saw the X-Men, around the same time. I didn't even notice it was Jean Grey until, I watched YouTube videos where other people pointed it out. And I was like, oh yeah, that is Jean Grey. Because I wasn't that big of a fan of the X-Men movie. I, only saw them, once or twice. So I just didn't remember her from it. But that is, I still like how she says she's a mutant, though. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neil Howells, who says, it seems to me that the Federation are very much on their high horse in this episode. If Kamala has no objection and is not being ill-treated by her betrothed, who are we to judge about an arranged marriage? It happened in Yawn of Troyes and will happen again in Precious Cargo. So she has wonderful chemistry with Patrick Stewart. I have to bring up the shitty security on the Enterprise again. Why does Data take Camilla to 10 forward? I am not sure who is more annoying. The miners, what the fuck is it with Star Trek obsession with miners anyway? Or the Ferengi. Either way, it makes my score lower. 4 Ferengi looking for a barbershop out of 10. That's an easy. The Ferengi are more annoying than the miners. Yeah, the miners are kind of annoying, but they're not they're not as bumbling and just frustrating as the Ferengi. So they're definitely more annoying. So you mentioned 2 other episodes that also had arranged marriages, Yawn of Troyes and Precious Cargo. So what do these 3 episodes have in common? I hate them all. I hate all these episodes. And in both those instances, I also railed against arranged marriages, particularly Yawn of Troyes. And so, yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm the judgmental person you think I am, Brandon, or that you were referring to, because I think the Federation has every right to be on their high horse, because I think this is misogynistic. I think it is sexist, because she is willing to do the marriage, but she's forced to by her culture and society, and I think that's fucked up and sexist. But that is just me. Anyway, and also it's funny you say she has wonderful chemistry with Patrick Stewart. Does she though? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But I've heard other people ask Why does she bring Data to 10, why does Data bring her to 10 forward? Which, yes, that wouldn't seem like the best place to bring her if you want to avoid her hitting on men. Take her to a bar. Yeah, that seems like that is obviously stupid. I've heard other people suggest that she should have been hanging out with other women. But I guess they didn't want to tackle how she would affect other women. They just shied away from that altogether, which I think is a cop-out. Because, the ambassador's like, the men on your ship won't be able to control yourself. And Picard's like, not all men, and goes to Data. But, there's also women on the ship. Did you guys forget that? I guess they did. I don't know. Anyway, it's funny because from your comment, Brandon, I get the impression you like this episode a lot more than I do. But we are about to give it the same rating. So my rating for The Perfect Mate out of 10 is going to be a 4 poor. Now this is upping it because when I did my season 5 review I gave it a 3, so I am elevating it ever so slightly because watching it in context and comparing it to some of these other episodes that were really boring in season 5 and just in general some of these other bad episodes throughout the series, I do see that this isn't as bad. That there is, it was made what I think someone else in the comments mentioned this, that the acting of Femke Janssen, her acting goes a long way. She does a really, really great job, a really great performance. And on top of that, as I said, there were some good scenes in this episode, such as both the Beverly scenes. Both the scenes where Beverly was talking to Picard, I think was really good. This wasn't the first time we saw Beverly have breakfast with Picard. I think the first time was Cupid, but this is when it starts to get normalized, I think. That one scene where Picard, is complaining about how he's falling in love with Camilla and has to give her away, and Beverly's just like, I don't really know what you want what to say to this, and Picard's like, you don't really need to say anything, just be there for me, it's good to have a shoulder to cry on. She's like, I'm always there if you need it, and they kind of hold hands. That was a really lovely a moment. It was one of the most lovely moments between these two characters we get in the whole scene. So I do have to, and the whole show, so I do have to elevate my rating slightly for those two scenes alone. And as I said, Camilla's acting in it was really good as well. So it's not quite as bad as I remember, but it's still not a good episode. Particularly that it's frustrating for me to know that if they just went with Michael Pillar's ending, that this episode would have been way, way better. It actually would have been a good episode. I might have given this episode an 8 or a 9 if they went with that ending, but they went with this other one. By the way, they say, this ending, I've heard people say this ending is better because it's more, sad and melancholic. But that other ending still would have been melancholic because Picard still would have lost her. They could have even had a thing when she rejected Ulrich of Picard saying, so now you can be with me. And then her saying, no, I don't want to do that either. That still would have been a sort of melancholic feeling as far as Picard goes. But I just think there would have been a much, much, much better ending. I totally disagree with people who thought it wouldn't be earned. I thought it would have been totally earned, but instead, it's misogynistic. It's about, she has to go with this guy who doesn't even want to be with her just to please her culture that forced her from a young age to do this. I think it's fucked up, personally. And it is boring. As Ricky said, it's just mostly a boring episode, and I didn't really buy the chemistry between her and Jean-Luc. And it just seemed contrived, the fact that she was so hot on him. So, no, I think I'm being generous by giving it a 4. Generous me. It's a very, very low 4. I was thinking either a high 3 or low 4. If I did 0.5s, I'd give it a 3.5. That would solve my problem, but I don't. So I'll be generous. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and give it a 4. So that is it for my review of The Perfect Mate. So coming up on my channel, If I can just bring up the schedule here. Thursday will be my review for Imaginary Friend. Saturday, I'll be over on Patreon to do a revisiting my review for I, Borg over for my Patreon supporters. And then on Sunday night or Monday morning, I will review episode 5 of House of the Dragon. And then Tuesday, I will cover the second half of Star Trek Prodigy Season 2, covering the last 10 episodes of that season. So that is, that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek, The Next Generation, many more Star Trek videos, and many other videos and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.